Hi there, short film fans. I'm Nigel Morgan, and welcome to the Cameo Launch Short Film Podcast. This is the second in our three-part interview with Emmeline Hartley, actor, writer, producer, and one of the key figures of the Nexus Cast and Crew network. Before we jump into the episode, however, we'd really appreciate it if you would head to cameolaunch.com/podcast, where you can subscribe to our show. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and many more. If you're finding this episode on YouTube, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel, and of course, smash that bell for notifications of new content. Last episode, we took a deep dive into how Nexus connects grassroots filmmakers and the difficulties of independent filmmaking in the UK. This episode, we get a little bit more specific as Emmeline recants the making of short film drama Keep Breathing, directed by Mark Corden. Emmeline co-wrote Keep Breathing alongside Corden and Tommy Draper and co-starred in the film alongside Damien Molony. Emmeline was also the film's producer, putting her in a unique position to influence the messaging of a film tackling issues of sexual consent and power dynamics. You can find both the film and our review by heading to cameolaunch.com/reviews or by following the link in the description. Emmeline goes into detail as to what prompted her and the creative team behind Keep Breathing to address this very important issue and how they swung for the fences with the level of ambition applied to this film. Listen and enjoy.
So, the man and a woman, they meet in a lift. It's in her work building. She's just finished a day at work and she's on her way out. And he was there to fix the lift. He's a lift engineer, and he gets in it to ride back down once he's finished fixing. She jumps in. They recognize each other for a moment, and then the lift breaks down. And as they start talking in the broken down lift, it transpires that they actually met a few weeks prior and had a one night stand, and turns out that she was not so comfortable with the events that unfolded that night, and didn't feel like everything was consensual, whereas he had absolutely no idea of this. So as they are sort of battling it out, you kind of flash back and sort of see what happened. So yeah, that's the gist.
Yeah, I mean, what I thought was really good about the way the film approached the topic is that it did it from the angle of perspective and how people remembered the event. And yeah, what I thought was really quite interesting is the fact, you've got this guy who, when you meet him, seems perfectly nice, really fun. There's even the little bit with the woman who walks past the lift, gets a bit annoyed that it's not working. He stops to give her keys when she drops them or something like that, and she just kind of walks off in a huff. So immediately, the film is actually building up a fair amount of sympathy for this guy. So, nice guy, hardworking, trying to help, not being treated very well. So this is clearly how he sees himself as well. And then as the story kind of unfolds in this enclosed space, that's when we start kind of delving into perspectives or changed perspectives and recollections and all that kind of thing. And I think that's a really interesting way of addressing something like consent, because as you mentioned before, in many cases where people feel like they've been forced to engage in a sexual act non-consensually, the other party doesn't necessarily feel like or realize that they've done something wrong. But within as the story kind of plays out, you start to see the moments where he did actually ignore those kind of clear signs of being asked to stop. And as you say, he was kind of pushing his luck at certain points as well, and this, that, and the other. A lot of stuff that historically and socially, we've been taught to almost kind of play off, kind of brush aside or ignore or regard as somebody playing, quote, hard to get. And all of this feeds into how we've been taught to regard consent. And now we're starting to have those conversations, and rightfully so, and realizing just how big and widespread a problem it is, and that it is a case of how we're taught to view it as opposed to people actively and intentionally being malicious or predatory or anything like that. What were some of the conversations you had while you were developing the script? Obviously, you've got male co-writers, a male director. but this very much came from your experiences as well. What were some of the conversations, if you are able to go into that, that you had with them as you were developing the story?
Yeah, so I think it was interesting because at one point the story got really convoluted, because it sort of started showing flashbacks to a police interview, and it started showing, implying that like instead of being a few weeks later that they'd bumped into each other in the lift, it was like a few years later, and she'd like had a kid, and it was implying like could it be his, and it was like
Oh, right.
there was
Okay.
just like there was more to it in terms of the aftermath, like, her mental health and just spiraling into this ideal victim kind of stereotypical bullshit that we're fed all the time, that, like she has to be devastated by it and it has to affect her for the rest of her life, otherwise it didn't happen, you know. And we were kind of conforming to a lot of that and trying to do too much. And at one point we had to stop and just say, like, this is either a story about the aftermath or it's a story about what happened. Um, and we were just like, well, we see the aftermath all the time because the aftermath is always projected onto victims all the
Hmm.
time based on what we've sort of seen on TV. Um, and this is a story about what actually happened because you don't actually get to see the what happened part very often, or ever in kind of these nuanced scenarios. So we sort of had to scale it back and work out, right, what are we actually wanting to do here? Where are we going with this? What is the point? Let's just make one of them. Um, and I'm really glad that we did that because it helped to kind of focus on what actually really mattered to us when we were making this. So yeah, and also it was a lot of kind of I was feeding into the dialogue a lot, based on experiences, of like kind of the over apologizing, and also the way that when I'm sort of testing the water with someone new, not really finishing sentences, kind of letting half a sentence hang there just to test the kind of, but in this film you see that he kind of takes all of them the wrong way. Like, it's cold, you should, she means go home, but he takes that as come in. And like, can we just kiss, and only kiss is what she means, but he takes it as can we just take it slow. Do you know what I mean? So there's loads of sort of things like that. And something that's sort of come up, since, in a way, is I kind of realized in conversations and discussions that we've had with audiences afterwards about the different ways in which we communicate and how we should be checking in with each other. I realized that I've actually projected a lot of, my own sort of autistic traits onto that character, in the ways that I communicate or struggle to communicate, in situations where there's sort of a lot of anxiety, particularly like with sexual sort of intimacy and things like that. So, that's another thing. Like, and I love the fact that I didn't pick up on that sooner, because if I had, then there might have been something explicitly in the script stating that she's autistic. And actually, I like the fact that it doesn't, because, um, a lot of people can, relate to it for different reasons. And also, it's something that can come up when you delve into it deeper and start to kind of think, well, if people are communicating in different ways, then maybe we do need to just proactively be checking in all the time.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point. And yeah, and it does kind of play into how um, the personal situations of the sort of creative team kind of subconsciously layer themselves into the story being written and end up communicating with people who not through anything exclusionary, but weren't necessarily the target audience, if you like, of the topic. Um, have you had anyone reach back as a result of having seen the film, that has picked up on um, the the sort of autistic elements of the character at all?
Um, Not like specifically. It's been something that's come up in, so like in schools and stuff when students are watching the film. I think someone, as they sort of were explaining why they felt like they were, um, like why they related to that character, they then said themselves, like, I really relate to that character. I'm autistic and I struggle to communicate like this, so I always do this. And it just so happened that I was running that session, and I was like, well, funnily you should say that, because like I'm autistic, and I think that the character possibly is as well, because I've projected a lot of those traits onto her. Um, Even the way that I acted it, to be honest. And that opened up a whole conversation. It was an amazing conversation about different communication styles and different communication barriers, and kind of being really, really explicit with that communication.
Right, right, and yeah, I mean that's again another interesting point with when referring to communication as well, and how signs get read, because when again we're not really taught to, well, I guess more so now, I suppose, but historically and certainly when I was growing up, there was very little um, encouragement to look for signs of stop. There were the key signs of go, but and we're taught to look out for those. But those moments where somebody might want to stop, but and it might actually be explicit in saying stop. Other times they might kind of give what in hindsight are clear signals as well, but might not necessarily know how to communicate that clearly without hurting somebody's feelings or pushing them further away than they actually want to push them or something like that. So yeah, so then it kind of gets into the realms of communication, how you speak, how you get heard, and what gets heard when you actually do say, I don't want to. How did that factor into how you were encouraged to play the character outside of what you were projecting, and how your screen partner was encouraged to portray himself as well? Because again, we are introduced to him as he's a nice guy. When you go into the flashbacks and you go to the moment when your two characters meet, he doesn't seem lecherous or pushy or anything like that. It seems a bit um, quirky, funny, whatever. You guys are initially getting on. So, what were some of the ways in which you were both taught to approach your respective characters when it comes to where the communication starts to misalign?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's hard to remember specifically the conversations that we had at the time. It's so crazy that it's 4 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember one thing around Damien's character kind of taking up a lot of space in comparison to my character. And like, so that physical kind of amount of space, especially in a lift where it's really clear who's taking up what space. Um, and um, just the kind of I think casting actually played a huge part of it, and that was a process that I was quite heavily involved in as well for the other character. Um, it was really important that like they were nice, but also really important that they understood what we were doing. And the great thing about Damien is his just whole vibe, everything that he kind of gives off is nice. And um like when Mark first had the conversation with him on the phone, like once, contract's been signed, everything been sorted, he got it like instantly. Like I don't think Mark even had to say anything. It all just sort of came out within the first couple of minutes, and it was really, really clear that we were working with someone who was very sort of understanding, sympathetic to the issues that we were dealing with. Um, but in terms of like actual direction, Mark was brilliant, and he had sort of very sort of specific ideas in his head. I remember in the bedroom scene, when it was at a moment after I'd pushed him off, and then he was sort of sat at the end of the bed. I remember Mark had said to me, like, you need to just hold that for as long as humanly possible until you literally can't bear it anymore and you have to go back over to him. Um, and so I think it's my favorite moment of the whole film is just when we're both just sat there in silence for ages, um, because it's so real.
Yeah.
and so much is said in that moment of silence. And I just love the fact that Mark really pushed for that because he knew what that silence meant.
Yeah.
Um, and it's funny actually that moment came from an experience that I had with somebody while we were actually writing the script.
Really.
Yeah, and what's interesting as well is the person had actually been sent an earlier version of it as well. So like knew that I was doing this project. And again though, like, even he's not a bad person
Yeah.
in any way, shape, or form. Quite the opposite. But it was that is a moment that happened that was excruciatingly painful and uncomfortable for both of us, I think,
Hmm.
at a time when we just happened to be in development. And of course, I sort of went straight to Mark the next day and was talking about it, and we were like, yeah, that's going in. And interestingly, that same night that happened with me, Mark had an experience in a bar with a friend of kind of somebody invading their personal space, like trying to hug them. As a woman, his friend was a woman, I mean, and the way that kind of hug just invaded is again that's then something that went straight into this sort of next draft of the script as well.
Mm.
So yeah,
Yeah, I do.
um,
Yeah, there
a
is an
lot of
element of that.
those experiences that we were having and observing through the entire development process were kind of factoring into the way that he was directing it and working with us.
Yeah, I guess it would require a certain amount of understanding and empathy as well. I mean, I guess that's a requirement of any director, but in a subject matter like this, it would require somebody to be a good listener, for example, as well as a good communicator, to really understand why a person feels uncomfortable in these types of situations, and um, how another person might not read that, or might be taught to not see the signs of that, either consciously or unconsciously. Um, and yeah, and I guess it kind of opens up to these blind spots, which we're now all on a societal level being challenged to really look for, um, which which is great. And I think the way the film encourages us to do that is great, because it's, in as much as it is really uncomfortable, and it does at times get really intense, and you get claustrophobic. I mean, setting the whole thing in a lift is just a masterstroke. But at the same time, we, I think, especially as men, are sort of forced to look at our own behavior, things that we grew up thinking are totally acceptable or even desirable, and now realizing, holy crap, no, that is not okay at all. But it's not done in an accusatory way, like you're all bad people, because it's just kind of like these are things we're not encouraged to look at, and we need to start looking at them.
It's funny you should say that because it's the same for me too. I had to do a lot of kind of looking in at myself, my own behaviors, and the way that, like, I am with, in my intimate life, in the same way that any man would be. Finger pointing certainly isn't what we're wanting to do here. I mean, obviously, we know that predominantly it is kind of there is a gendered sort of side to this, but ultimately we all can be bad at listening, and we can all put ourselves first and disregard other people's feelings.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are a lot of levels on which this film has to operate. Really, was there a conscious decision to switch styles at the writing stage, between perception, between flashback, between the lift, and how did you come to those creative decisions?
That definitely came up. Like, everything was so thought out. In fact, there's so many subliminal kind of things in there as well that I forget are in there. Um, in fact, this one came from Damien. The pants that he wears, which you only get like a glimpse of, are like big pink lollipops to kind of
Right.
indicate that like his character wasn't planning on having pulling anyone that night. Um and there's also the fact that she didn't say the word no through the entire script whatsoever until the last thing that she says at the end. Like, we took out all the no's, which no one ever picks up on. But these are all just little tiny things that kind of the details that we sort of implemented. So yeah, everything was so thought out. Um, I mean, of course, there's other subliminal things in there. For example, I think one of the posters in the lift was replaced in post by our VFX artist contract. Um, but that's not deliberately kind of part of the story, but lots of hidden little memoirs in there. But no, in terms of like the color scheme, the color grade was actually quite a process in itself. But like, um, we knew that we knew that that was going to be an essential part of kind of telling the two sides, the cold sort of reality of the present day versus that kind of warm glow of that night out and new relationships and chemistry and all of that. Like, and yeah, the editing choices again, very, very different. Like, um, even between the club scene and the bedroom, um, our uh, our editor is just absolutely brilliant. Like, Drew's incredible, and he
Excellent
just
work,
sort of
I've
does
got to
that
say.
really well in terms of that kind of tone, like tonally, and the tonal shifts and stuff. Um, there was stuff though that we like details that we really wanted to kind of get in there, but due to some issues when we were actually filming, we were unable to. We didn't have the time. Um, there's a point where at the end, when the power balance shifts between them in the lift, and she kind of regains that power, if you like. We shoot from the other side, um, but there was a transition that we actually had scheduled in to use to in order to do that, um, but we couldn't do it in the end. That was like with a jib crane flying over and stuff, and then we also had there were shots from the CCTV camera and through the buttons in the lift, like kind of the point of view from the lift to kind of just add that sort of claustrophobic element, but also the elements that there are people that can be hearing this conversation.
Oh, I
Um,
see. Okay.
because when you're in a lift shaft, especially when there's people trying to work to fix it, like people can hear voices from that.
Yeah, that
Um,
is a good point.
so yeah, there was loads of sort of extra details, but I mean, thankfully, I think the script was so sort of good and Mark's direction was so good that we just sort of we didn't need all of those like additional sort of detailed bits there, but it was all so thought out.
That's really good. I mean, it's good that these ideas and sort of creative perspectives are there. I think once you've kind of established the stylistic um, premise of the film, from that point, I think less is more. I think you can just kind of let the script and the performance of the script carry the whole thing through, and that's largely the choice that gets made, and I think that's to the film's benefit. But I think those more straightforward elements are enhanced by the people involved having these additional things in mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I think just kind of that subtle crossing of the eye line would have a more lasting impact, even if it doesn't have as much of an immediate visual impact than a sort of big flashy transition.
It does still feel like a new, like something's different, if you know
Yeah,
what I mean.
exactly, exactly.
Even if you can't really put your finger on what it is. And there was also that, like, we did some negative framing at some point as well as
Yeah,
things were starting to get awkward. Um, and like this is all the genius work of Bayer, our cinematographer, and Mark, whose like minds when put together, I'm surprised the world didn't implode. But um yeah, it was really cool. Like for me, the whole process, I was able to sort of really up my game as an actor and a filmmaker, because I was working with people now who are just epic, like in every way. um and like at the time it was the best sort of acting I'd done, because I was opposite Damien and he's incredible, and I could really actually sort of get into what I was doing and into my character, into the dynamic and everything in a way that I hadn't really been able to access before. Not to say that anyone I'd worked with before wasn't amazing, because that's not true. He just had this quality that really sort of helped me to up my game.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because when you're talking about something like this, you really not just need everyone to be on the same page, but you need to be comfortable enough with each other to go to uncomfortable places. It kind of requires a really deep level of trust with the people that you have to go to those places with, right?
On that note, I
Mm.
can't believe I've not even mentioned this yet. We worked with Ita O'Brien, who just happens to be like one of the most incredible industry players right now. She's an intimacy coordinator, who's worked on, gosh, sex education, normal people, like Behind Her Eyes, the I May Destroy You, and just yeah, like everything. Like she's incredible, and we were so lucky to work with her.
Mm.
And it was such a fascinating experience as well.
Yeah.
To kind of really unpick and kind of work with her process.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's really cool. And especially there have been growing conversations around the use of intimacy coordinators, the necessity of intimacy coordinators. Um, and I think it's fantastic. This is becoming more and more of a mainstay of any given film set.
The thing with Ita is like she's incredible. She kind of like addresses the elephant in the room immediately and makes sure that everybody's on the same page. She's very frank, and she like I don't know, she can be discreet and stuff if you need her to be. And also, she brought a real sort of creative value to the project as well. Like, it's not all just about everybody's safety. Like, she is a creative. And funnily enough, when I was watching Normal People, there was a moment in their first intimate scene where I was like, "Did Ita do the coordination on this?" Because, like, I recognised that,
Yeah.
and she did, sure enough.
But on that same note as well, how was that experience for you as a writer and as a producer and as an actor, bringing those elements together, making sure there was an intimacy coordinator there, um, all of that. What were some of the advantages and some of the challenges of combining those three roles?
So on that note with intimacy coordination, I felt even more grateful to have Ita there, because I was also coming, like I was on, producing the project, because there's nothing worse than casting somebody to play opposite you in an intimate scene, um, like in any way, shape, or form, like, ever. Like, that's just the most uncomfortable thing, because it's like I've had it in the past where, I've been, I'm being cast opposite somebody who's also, the producer, director of the film or whatever, and then all of a sudden, like, in these sort of intimate moments, you're kind of you're at their mercy really, and you kind of just gotta do what they say. And
Mm,
luckily, I mean, I've been fortunate where when I've been in that situation, they've not been kind of exploiting me in that sort of respect, if you know what I mean. Like it's always been kind of respectful and professional. But the thing is like that's always lingering in the back of your mind. Like, what are the intentions? Because we all know and have experienced or witnessed or seen like casting calls or job descriptions on casting websites or platforms, or you've heard stories from people who've actually been cast in these productions where it's a director who's directing really sort of explicit sex scenes with themselves playing that lead role opposite a woman, and like they're basically getting them to sort of pretty much act out their own fantasies, and it's absolutely disgusting, and it's a
yeesh.
serious issue. Like they prey on sort of new actors and things
It's
like that.
just crazy.
So
Yeah.
so that kind of power balance is difficult to work with when you're working with intimate content. So to be able to be like, right, okay, yes, I'm producing this. Okay, I'm casting you. This is what the role requires. We have an intimacy coordinator,
Yeah.
like, and she's going to negotiate the intimacy sort of clauses for this contract now,
Yeah.
and sort of check in with you and see what you want, what you're happy with, and you can have that conversation with her, and like, that can be confidential and she can handle it discreetly, and I could just remove myself from that now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, and like I think that was a real advantage of having Ita there, to sort of just make sure that there's everything's sort of valid and credible, and that nobody feels uncomfortable coming into it, and that if there was any sort of power dynamic that was problematic and stuff, that then it would be addressed. I had Owen Tooth, who's a good friend of mine. He came on to sort of take over producing responsibilities, for the actual shoot itself. So I handed over to him a couple of days before the shoot, and then he handed back to me after the shoot. Um, and also we had Scarlett Kefford, who's brilliant, as our production manager. So yeah, Owen and Scarlett were kind of working together through the shoot, and I didn't have to undertake any production responsibilities whatsoever while we were actually filming, which enabled me to obviously really get into that character, into my role as a performer. However, as well and good as that is, there is nothing to stop me standing there knowing that we are 4 hours behind schedule
Yeah.
when everything is going wrong. Like, because I'm such a key part of putting that schedule together and putting the locations together, and I know the shot list inside out and everything because I've been there from the beginning. If we're behind and all the crew is stood down and there is a problem, I am going to be very aware of it.
Mm, mm,
I was on the first day. We had some problems, and I really struggled to get into my role that day because I was very conscious of the problems, and it was like really freaking out and yet trying not to get involved. So there's yeah, it's hard to it is even if you bring people in to hand over to, it's difficult to detach yourself. But I can't wait for the day where I don't have to have like I don't need to wear those hats all at once, because it does trap you a bit.
I guess in this kind of situation, it seems fairly necessary though, because I think they're again just kind of going back to some of the themes of the story. One of those key themes being our blind spots. There are certain ways of focusing on little nuances and details that might get past other people that you specifically will see. And as such, it's kind of good that you're there on that producer level. You're there on that creative level as a writer, um, but you're also able to implement that through a performance as well. Um, and I think the film is all the better for you wearing those hats, in as much as I know you would rather not do all of those at once. Um, but I think it does actually work in the film's favor that you do, at least in this instance. Have there been any sort of self-generated or sort of grassroots type projects where you have been able to just kind of settle into a performance role rather than having to be acutely aware of all of the production end of things?
I think yes, there has been, but a lot of the time when I'm working on that sort of collaborations at that kind of level, with the amount of producing that I have done,
Mm,
it's hard still to switch off and not try and offer advice or take control. Um, I know that sounds kind of counterproductive, but like obviously, I'm a lot of the time if I'm working with kind of emerging filmmakers, who perhaps haven't produced anything to the same sort of scale as things like like Keep Breathing, or who haven't necessarily had the kind of amount of on-set experience that I've had on features and things like that. um, then I might be able to see a problem and see a solution, a really quick solution to it, or be able to give impart advice or knowledge or whatever, to help them. And so yeah, that still kind of means that my head is still in that place. But, like, I mean, I just shot an amazing sort of really high-end commercial, which was brilliant, and, like, it was the first sort of one of the first times where I've just not had to think about anything like that, because obviously everyone I'm working with is already, like, up there way beyond kind of anything I've ever done,
yeah.
and, I'm able to just fully immerse myself in that role and into my own job. So it depends on like the sort of scale of the project, but also actually I've just started developing a play, and this is something that I am developing creatively and like co-writing, and I'm acting in it, but like I might not actually end up producing it, and I won't feel that kind of, if I do hand it off to other producers and let them come in and take over that, I won't necessarily feel that kind of like feel compelled to try and regain control or take those reins, because I haven't produced theatre before. Therefore, any producer that comes in to take that on is going to know more than me, be better than me, and you know, do a better job than what I could in this sort of place yet right now. Um, Makes sense. So like, yeah, I absolutely can 100% let go when I'm on projects that like everybody working on it like is already like there, knows what they're doing, and doesn't need my support in that capacity. But I haven't had much opportunity yet to do that. But
Yeah, yeah. What's the play? Just so we can keep a lookout for it.
the play is currently not 100% announced in terms of the name and everything that we're doing, but it is kind of loosely adapted from Keep Breathing. Um, Loosely. It was inspired by Keep Breathing. It sort of serves a different point. And the play sort of theatre format is really enabling us to play with some really interesting elements with it. So yeah, it's just been Arts Council funded for an R&D, and the R&D is going to be very intense. It's like a 3-week R&D. I think we're going to look to do it with, well, we're doing it, I think, with week on, week off, week on, week off, because of how sort of complicated and sophisticated it is with all the elements together. It will enable us to have some time to breathe in between each week, I think. Um, but yeah, it's very, very exciting.
That was Emmeline Hartley, co-star, co-writer and producer of Keep Breathing. Our thanks to Emmeline for discussing not just this film, but the difficult topics that it deals with. If you were affected by any of the conversation or the film itself and you feel like you need support, we have included links in the description, including the counselling services of Women's Work Derbyshire, who are one of the partners of the Keep Breathing production. Please do use the resources provided if you feel you need them. Emmeline will be back with us for one final episode where we will explore whether there is a route to financial stability in short film and some of the avenues that Emmeline discovered. If you are a filmmaker looking for a platform for your short film, then submit your film to the Cameo launch short film cinema via Film Freeway now. You can get a summary of what's involved by heading to cameolaunch.com/submit or follow the link in the description and submit your film today. Successful submissions will win a laurel, a review, and an invitation to the filmmakers to appear on this show. Submissions are also open for entry into the Surrey Short Film Festival, which will be held at Nova Cinema in Woking from the 6th to the 8th of October. This is a great opportunity to put your film on the screens of an award-winning cinema and in front of in-person and online audiences. We will be showcasing short films from female filmmakers, short film creators from the LGBTQ+ community, makers of British film, short films depicting the experience of the African and Asian diasporas, student short films, and many, many more. Go to cameolaunch.com/submit or filmfreeway.com/Surrey Short Film Festival to find out more and submit today. Don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel, and most importantly, come on back for our next episode. Thanks as always for joining us. You all take care, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.